Although my whole channel is based around video games, the more I invest my time talking about them, the more I realize I know very little about the subject. For the majority of my life, if you were to ask me why I enjoy playing games, I'd probably tell you something along the lines of, well, they're fun. As much as that still holds true as the most significant factor in why I play them, there is so much more to take into consideration now. There are so many different kinds of games that I play for a plethora of diverse reasons than just them being fun. For example, in the case of competitive games such as Rocket League or Super Smash Bros., obviously I play them because they're fun, but also sometimes it just feels good to show my friends I'm better than them at something. Especially if they share the same energy, it only heightens that experience from there. Constantly pushing yourself harder and harder, with the goal of absolutely crushing that one friend who is better than you, is what makes me keep playing games years after their release. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have games that I use as a sort of mental therapy. Games like Stardew Valley illustrate this perfectly. Sometimes I need a break from all the action to unwind and just do a little bit of digital fishing. Maybe it was a stressful day at work or personal drama. Either way, I know games like these are there for me to fall back on. But what about the case of the games that I play purely for nostalgic reasons? Obviously, they transport me back to a time when things were much simpler and I didn't have to psychoanalyze what they meant to me in that moment. But now going back and playing them, I feel like I might be blinded by their sentimentality. It's hard for me to discern whether or not these games were actually the masterworks I remember them being, or if the feelings I had were just rushing emotions from the past. I've wanted to talk about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time ever since I started making reviews on this channel. However, I felt like whatever I had to say about the game had already been said about 1,000 times. In the purest sense, this game is a classic. In fact, it's the first real video game I ever owned, excluding maybe some old computer games that hardly even worked at the time. Playing Ocarina of Time for the first time is an experience I couldn't possibly forget. Not knowing the full scale of what I had gotten myself into, just the first section of the game was big enough for me to get lost in. I remember exploring every corner of Kakariko Village, spending hour after hour trying to travel to the end of the ominous Lost Woods, and collecting every rupee I came across. Being my first actual video game, I was clueless to what I actually was supposed to be doing. Keep in mind, this was a time before you could just search up a guide on YouTube that set you on the right path. So it took full days before I even reached the first dungeon, the Great Deku Tree. It was impossible to avoid enemies at this point like I normally would have. I found myself falling constantly every time I made it just a little bit higher up on the tree, and I can still remember the mental battle I had realizing that the only way to make it further into the dungeon was to throw myself from the top. Little details like these were so vivid in my mind as moments that defined my childhood. And after countless attempts of taking on the terrifying Queen Goma, I honestly expected that to be the end of the game. So, as you can imagine, finding out that I had barely scratched the surface was overwhelmingly exciting. Going back and playing Ocarina of Time today, getting to this point probably would only take me around a half an hour in contrast to the weeks it took me. That being said, at this point in my life, I know this game like the back of my hand. Even so, my gaming experience is far greater. For the average gamer, I think this opening section isn't something that would blow their mind, especially with the amount of larger-than-life cinematic introductions we have in more recent titles. I think that the majority of new Zelda players might even consider this part a little too drawn out. Take Breath of the Wild's Great Plateau, for instance. The early hours of the game are bound to a sort of open tutorial area that teaches you all of the base concepts that you should be able to expect from the game when you are finally able to explore the fully open world. Although there are hundreds and hundreds of things to do in the plateau alone, I feel like most people are still itching to break out of those barriers to explore some of the places that can be seen in the distance. This shows that no matter how many options you give a player, nobody likes to be restricted from what's just out of their reach. But if you had reached this point in Ocarina of Time, the world is your oyster. Wide open plains, sweeping and energetic music, foreign and intimidating enemies, this is what Ocarina of Time is all about. The sheer size of the open world and endless possibilities is still today something to be impressed by. If you consider that this is the first time the idea of an open world has ever really existed, you can't help but feel mesmerized. Sneaking into the castle while guards keep watch at every corner, scrambling up a volcano as boulders come crashing down, finding a secret waterfall entrance to a hidden cavern palace, This is what gaming was always meant to be. Not just some pastime to keep kids preoccupied, but the adventure of a lifetime. Originally, when I decided to go back and play through the game again, I expected to have a straightforward path from one dungeon to another, but I found myself exploring corners of the map I never knew existed. That's when I started to understand what makes Ocarina of Time so special. It wasn't named the best game of all time every year for no reason. This game is the answer to why video games are so popular today. There are so many games coming out now that are struggling to emulate the same feeling that Ocarina of Time created back then. And I truly believe that if the ambitious minds at Nintendo didn't create this masterpiece when they did, the games that we love today could very well have never come to be. So if you're stuck trying to decide whether or not you should play The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in 2021, stop considering and just jump in head first. There are so many magical moments and friends made along the way that I could tell you about, but I would be spoiling an unforgettable adventure that you won't regret. Trust me, I barely even told you about 1/10 of the game alone. Even if you've already played through Ocarina of Time, take this as a perfect opportunity to try it again. I promise you will not forget it. In my eyes, no matter how many incredible games we get in the future, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time will always be the greatest game of all time. Hey, did you know that only 7% of people who watch my videos are subscribed? I'm trying to reach 100 subscribers by the end of the month, so I would greatly appreciate it if you help me out. Regardless, thanks so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you guys next time. See ya.